Dr. Marcello Sbrocca, and in this video I'm going to talk about how to make analysis practical, and practical to a performer. So first off, what is analysis in music? Well, in reality, in the most basic sense, analyzing a piece and either writing it down or presenting it is just coming up with a way of describing a piece of music. It's as simple as that. If you're somebody who went to music school, you might be predisposed to analyzing a piece in a particular way. Whereas if you're somebody who's been playing music for a long time, you may start out analyzing a piece in that kind of really typical academic way, but maybe over time your analysis techniques might change and become a little more, say, practical or something like that. Well, to explain that, I want to first start by talking about what things are like when you're in music school. So in the beginning of music school, you take 2 or 3 years of music theory class. Most of it is tonal, and it's supposed to be fundamental, but it's very theoretical. And then as you go through music school, especially if you go to graduate school, things get more and more specific, and there'll be particular kinds of tonal music, or it'll be a class where it's all non-tonal, or it'll be a class where you're just studying selected works from a particular composer, or you're just studying works that encapsulate a particular, style in a particular part of one century or something like that. And I believe this style of teaching music theory in music school started sometime in the 20th century, and it was either the British or the Americans where they separated music theory from music analysis. Music theory is supposed to represent the theoretical side of things, and analysis was supposed to represent the practical side of things. Now, on one hand, you could say that that's a good idea because you study music theory to give you the kind of tools to then start to do real analyses or practical analyses of works. But you could also criticize it because once you spent a lot of time in that theoretical world, and the theory comes after the practice, it's not that, composers did not necessarily write pieces because of, in the ways that we analyze them. We came up with ways to describe these pieces after they were written, most of the time, not always, especially with non-tonal music. But I digress. To me, I don't like really that we start so theoretical and then try to make things practical, because that theoretical side of things tends to stick with people more because that's what they learned when they were younger. And especially for those who don't go into graduate school, really all they're ever exposed to is that super theoretical side of things. And that's kind of problematic because it either shows them that theory is irrelevant, because many music theory techniques are not that practical. They don't really make you play a piece better. Or they kind of end up taking you down some theoretical rabbit hole, and it makes you come up with analyses that are full of facts and true information and stuff like that, but they're pieces of information that don't really help you play better, and then some people will try to use that information that's not that relevant, and they'll try to justify it, and it's kind of a mess. I much prefer it where right from the beginning we're trying to make music theory practical. When you do that, you're starting to see how connected music theory is with musicology, with the practical side of actually playing pieces of music. So that's just my opinion. But anyway, I just wanted to explain, for those of you who went to music school, how it typically works. It starts theoretical and it's supposed to end more practical, and kind of the issues with doing that. But now I want to talk about what makes a good What makes a good analysis? Well, first off, it depends on, you know, who is making the analysis and who do they want to read it or, understand it or whatever. If you're a theoretician, a music theoretician, well, then it's fine if you have some really convoluted, complicated, or, irrelevant analysis from the perspective of the performer. But if you're a performer and somebody's trying to help you play a piece better by giving you a bunch of theoretical information, that's not really good. That's not beneficial. I forgot what the form of analysis is called, but sometimes people will go through an entire piece of music and they'll write down every single time the note A appears, and then they'll make some graph or whatever of how many times A comes up versus B flat versus this note versus that note. And now this, again, really complicated, maybe even interesting form of or analysis of a piece of music. But at the end of the day, it may or may not, probably won't, help you play the piece better. Which leads me to my next point, which is what makes, or if I didn't already mention this, but what makes an analysis useful to a performer? Earlier I just mentioned, it's like you could have an analysis that's really interesting to a theoretician but useless to a performer. So what makes it useful to a performer? Well, the number one rule is, does it actually make you play the piece better? It's so common that people are trying to explain a piece to somebody else, either in a master class or in a lesson or maybe even in some paper. And it's like everything they're saying might be true, but it's too theoretical. It's not practical enough. It's not directly informing me as a performer how to play the piece better. For example, I can't tell you how many times I've seen master classes where either the master of the master class is pointing out pieces of information that are either too theoretical and therefore irrelevant, or they're too vague and disconnected from the piece that they don't mean anything, or they're these super generic, repetitive comments like, the most common ones are, if they see forte, they tell you to play louder. If they see piano, they tell you you should have played quieter. If they see staccato notes, they tell you you should have played more short or something. That just, teachers of mine in the past would have called them bad band director comments. So again, we have too theoretical, too vague, and too generic, which are kind of in the same category. To me, a good analysis for a performer is one that starts from the perspective of asking the question, what is the musical style of this piece, and where are the phrases? And then how do they interact with each other? I look at a piece of music and I go, this is a Baroque piece of music. What are the implications of that? How is that going to affect how I phrase the piece? This is a contemporary work. What does that mean to me as a performer? What are the particular details of this piece by Luciano Berio that I should know if I want to create the most effective performance of this piece? Just to give an example. In phrasing, it's like, there is the theoretical definition of phrases or a phrase, but it's like when you're trying to make it more practical, you look at the piece in a little bit more intuitive of a way. Now, you don't want to be so intuitive that things get too vague, then they're useless. But it's like you want to look at the piece and go, where do I think the phrases are? You could be playing a piece of music that does not follow the traditional idea of a phrase, but you can just kind of tell by having maybe practiced the piece a little bit that that's a phrase. And I should play it like that. And I can't get into the details because there's too many, but it's like, which notes am I going to put emphasis on? Am I going to bring out the articulation here, and why? Or am I going to do rubato here, or am I not going to? It could be like, oh, we're playing a contemporary work, and it's pretty common that with contemporary works, people are too strict, and they should be more musical, and they should look for places where they can emphasize notes or glide over notes, or they should bring out certain elements to make this kind of sterile, really specific piece of music more musical or something. Just to give an example. But at the end of the day, the number one rule to a practical analysis of a piece is, does this actually make me play the piece better? Okay, and it's not only does it make me play the piece better, but do I feel like it's a real piece of information and not just some kind of vague, half-intuitive, generic piece of advice or something like that. You know, going through a piece, where's the phrase? Where should I put emphasis? What are the implications of the musical style? And so on. So anyway, it's just a quick video I decided to make because I've heard so many, master classes and read so many papers that they're trying to help you with a piece, trying to help you play a piece better, but they're too stuck in the theoretical and are giving you too many irrelevant pieces of information. And I've also read so many papers and heard so many master classes or had lessons where somebody was too generic or vague with a piece of information. So you have to find that balance between, something that's actually going to make you play the piece better, but is a real piece of information that's specific, that you can point to and it stands up to, it's a point that really means something. Anyway, those are just some of my thoughts. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them down below, and thank you so much for watching.